You pick Claude Mythos, your bill hits $100 a month, and then you find out Kimi K3 was free the whole time and nearly kept pace on the benchmarks that actually matter. Claude Mythos is Anthropic's flagship, built for coding and agentic work at a premium price, and Kimi K3 is the challenger with a free tier and a 1M context window. So the real question is whether that price gap is actually worth it. Test 1, cost and pricing. So you're shipping a side project, you've got maybe $20 a month to spend, and you're trying to figure out which model you can actually afford to run every day without watching the meter. Claude Mythos starts at $17 a month on annual billing. Kimi K3 has a free tier, and that gap compounds fast at any kind of volume. One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. I checked both pricing pages, and here's what I actually found. Claude Mythos has a clean, transparent page showing $17 a month on annual and $100 a month for the max plan. But Kimi K3's official pricing page on Moonshot's site returned an NGINX default, which is a dead end. So the free tier is community reported, not vendor confirmed. Kimi K3 takes cost and pricing, and I'll say the transparency issue is a real flag, but free still beats a paid monthly entry point for most people starting out. So Kimi K3 goes up 1 to 0, and that price gap is the number the whole comparison turns on. I've spent enough time inside these tools to know that pricing pages lie by omission, and this one is no different. So drop a comment below if the Moonshot pricing wall has caught you off guard too. Test 2, coding benchmark performance. The day your cheaper model ships broken code on a Friday deploy, and you spend the weekend debugging it, the price gap stops looking like savings. Goldie Bench ran both models across 50 shared coding tasks, head-to-head, and the margin between Claude Mythos and Kimi K3 is tighter than most people expect, given the cost difference. On the Goldie Bench, head-to-head, Claude Mythos leads Kimi K3 22 to 21 on shared tasks, which is a one-task margin, so it's close, but Claude Mythos does edge it, and Kimi K3 averages 7.89 out of 10 across all 50 tasks, which is a solid number, and it beats Fable 5 a convincing 29 to 17, so it's not a weak model by any stretch. Claude Mythos takes coding benchmarks because it wins the direct head-to-head, even if only by one task, and that's the cleanest apples-to-apples number we've got. So that ties it up at 1 apiece, and I didn't expect the gap to be this small, given how different the price tags are. Test 3, inference speed and throughput. If you're running an agentic loop that calls the model 200 times in a batch job, the difference between 50 tokens per second and 150 tokens per second is the difference between a 10-minute run and a 30-minute run. So I went looking for published tokens per second figures from both Anthropic and Moonshot. I couldn't find a published throughput figure from either vendor, and that's genuinely it, because neither Anthropic nor Moonshot puts tokens per second on their public docs. So the on-screen cards show nothing for both Claude Mythos and Kimi K3, and I'm not going to voice a number that isn't sourced. Speed is a no-call, score stays at 1 to 1, no data, and no winner. Okay, so we're tied at 1 to 1 with one no-call, and the context window test is next, which is where the price gap either becomes a no-brainer or a real trade-off depending on how much text you're actually feeding these models, and after that, deployment and modality closes it out. Test 4, context window size. You're feeding a model an entire codebase, 150,000 lines, plus documentation, plus conversation history, and the model silently drops the oldest context because it ran out of room, and now it's giving you answers that contradict code it already wrote, which is exactly the failure mode the gap between 200K and 1M tokens creates. Kimi K3 runs a 1M token context window, and Claude Mythos runs 200K, so that's 5 times larger. And Kimi K3 also supports up to 1M output tokens, which matters for long generation tasks like full document drafts or large code outputs. And I had to run the numbers twice because the gap is genuinely that wide. Kimi K3 takes context window size, and it's not a close call, because 5 times the context for free versus a paid monthly plan is a pretty hard case to argue against. So that puts Kimi K3 ahead 2-1, and this is the test that really starts to justify skipping the upgrade. Test 5, Deployment and Modality. You're building a workflow that needs to process images and text together. You pick the model that looked better on benchmarks, and then you find out it doesn't natively handle images, and you have to bolt on a separate vision pipeline, which adds cost and latency you didn't budget for. So native multimodal support is not a nice to have. Claude Mythos covers more first-party surfaces, 6 in total including Claude Code versus Kimi K3's 5, but Kimi K3 is natively multimodal and Claude Mythos makes no such claim. So if your workflow touches images, audio, or mixed inputs, Kimi K3 handles it out of the box, and the multimodal gap is what tips this test. Kimi K3 takes deployment and modality because native multimodal beats a wider surface count when mixed inputs are on the table, and that makes it Kimi K3 3, Claude Mythos 1, with 1 no-call on speed. Alright, so here's where Claude Mythos is the clear pick. It wins the direct Goldie bench head-to-head 22-21, so if raw coding accuracy on a shared task set is your deciding factor, it edges Kimi K3, and it also has a fully transparent pricing page, more first-party surfaces including Claude Code, and vendor-backed agentic performance claims you can actually hold Anthropic to. And here's where Kimi K3 is the obvious choice. The free tier undercuts Claude Mythos' paid entry point completely. The context window is 5 times larger at 1M tokens. It's natively multimodal, so there's no extra vision pipeline. And on Goldie bench, it beats Fable 5 a convincing 29-17, which shows it's genuinely competitive at the frontier level. If you need the raw coding edge and you're willing to pay for it, Claude Mythos is the safer bet. But for most people, the 8.3x price gap and 1M context window make Kimi K3 the obvious default. So start on the free tier and only upgrade if you actually hit its ceiling. One thing that doesn't show up in any of the benchmarks, Moonshot's platform pricing page currently returns an Nginx default error, which means if you're trying to calculate API costs for a production build, you're working off community-reported numbers with no confirmation from the source, and that's a real ops risk if you're budgeting at scale. So check the Moonshot platform docs directly before you commit. Now, Kimi K3 just beat Fable 5 by 12 tasks on Goldie bench, so if you're wondering how it stacks up against QN3 Coder, I ran that comparison too. And it's right up next, so go watch QN3 Coder versus Kimi K3 because it answers a question a lot of you guys have been asking in the comments.